Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a great day. We'll begin this webinar shortly. We're just going to wait a few minutes just to ensure everyone has joined us, and then we'll get underway. Thank you. All right, so we'll go ahead and begin today's webinar. So welcome to the Fall 2021 Roadway Watercourse Crossing webinar series, presented by the Alberta Watercourse Crossing Collaborative and sponsored by the Alberta Conservation Association. My name is Matthew Huberto, and I'll be your host throughout this webinar series. The Alberta Watercourse Crossing Collaborative is a non-for-profit organization whose primary objective is to restore lost and damaged fish habitat from poorly installed and maintained watercourse crossings. We achieve this objective through education and information transfer from subject matter experts to practitioners. This webinar series was created to help achieve those objectives by discussing important topics in an easily accessible format. All these webinars are recorded and will be available on AWC3's website. After today's presentation, there will be a short question and answer period. Questions can be asked by using the webinar toolbar located on the right side of your screen, which will allow you to type in questions. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Today's presentation is by Michael Wagner from the Alberta Agriculture and Forestry Division, and it'll be on sediment risk and road design. Michael is a forester hydrologist with over 20 years of experience in research hydrology, forestry, and watershed management issues. The position he has with the Forestry Division focuses on developing decision support tools related to forest management and cumulative effects to address water and watershed management issues across Alberta's forested regions. Without further ado, I will hand it over to Michael for his presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I am just going to share my screen, and I will have to figure out which screen this is. Oh, perfect. You should be able to see a blue screen.
Correct. Yeah, we can see that.
Okay. And now you should be able to see the title of my slide.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us during your lunch hour to learn something new or maybe something old. But regardless, I'm happy to see that some folks have dialed in and are interested in the topic that I'm going to speak to you today. Thank you for the introduction. As Matthew said, I'm a forest hydrologist with Alberta Agriculture and Forestry. And one of the things that I've been working on is understanding the magnitude of the impacts related to resource roads in the province related to risks to aquatic ecosystems and water quality. And so without further ado, I will flip the slide and we'll get into this. I should have enough time at the end of my talk to answer any questions you might have. And I believe this talk, as well as the slides, will be posted on the AWC3 website after. So briefly, I'll go over an outline of what I'm going to speak to today. And really, it's the example on the picture on the right-hand side is really the focus of much of the work that I do, and much of the field work and the science that I do. Excuse me. It's primarily related to processes related to runoff generation on mineral soils, specifically resource roads and forestry roads and trails across forested areas of the province. So what I'm going to talk about is some of the ways that we can try to understand this phenomenon across the landscape, specifically in terms of remote sensing based data, and how powerful that can be to inform land management decisions. And I'm going to talk about some tools which Forestry Division, in partnership with some organizations, has developed to facilitate the application of enhanced identification of risk and application of BMPs, specifically focused on topics related to roads, erosion, and sediment transport to aquatic ecosystems. And then hopefully be able to just bring this point home and show you how this can work through a practical example. So first and foremost, LiDAR-derived data sets. So I'm not sure how many of the attendees are land management planners or natural resource practitioners. But first and foremost, if we're a planner or if we're doing anything in front of a computer related to land management, is we're typically going to be using some sort of digital elevation model or some other type of product which is generated through remote sensing. And typically what I'm talking about today in today's day and age and across Alberta is LiDAR-derived data sets. So these are acquired through remote sensing, through laser imagery, which allow us to have a very detailed picture of what both the surface of the ground looks like, as well as the surrounding vegetation and other terrestrial features. So we use these LiDAR-derived data sets to generate other core data products, which some of you might be using today in your current work. Some of these products, for example, are enhanced forest inventories. So being able to calculate more accurate volumes, as well as species distribution and canopy closure. Wet areas mapping, which I'll talk to in a little bit, but as well as we can use these remote sense data products to classify streams or to look at relationships in between landscapes, topography, and ecosites, as well as generate products like flood risk maps for identifying risk. First and foremost, one of the products that forestry is a champion of is the product which we've developed, which is available publicly for use across Alberta. And the map on the right shows the extent of this product, which has been developed in partnership with the University of New Brunswick. It's the wet areas mapping product, and as of today, it is the largest initiative implemented or championed by the province to utilize that detailed digital elevation data that we have acquired through LiDAR. And so the wet areas mapping layer produces two fundamental products. One is a stream layer, which is over exaggerated, but it can be used to understand where water is flowing from and to on the landscape, and as well as provide an estimate for a depth to water estimate. So this can identify areas where we might find the water table in close proximity to the surface of the soil. Which helps from a standpoint of avoiding sensitive sites when we're doing forestry operations across the landscape. So what I'm talking about today is also a LiDAR-derived product. It is not expanded across the entire province of Alberta. It's primarily focused across the east slopes of the province on Crown forested land. And it's a product that is developed by a company called TerrainWorks. And so in essence, it's a ArcGIS add-in and used in an Esri-based environment, and it's modular in terms of the toolbox, and so it has a whole bunch of analytical capabilities. But first and foremost, it consists of a virtual digital watershed, which is basically your digital elevation model. But what's unique about this product is that it contains a series of analysis tools which are linked to the digital elevation model, which allows us to route things down hill slopes or across hill slopes onto roads and then into streams. And it also allows us to do the opposite, so move material from streams up into hill slopes if we were looking at those types of processes in riparian areas. So this is a set of analysis tools that's developed by a private company in the United States, but it's supported and shared across a community of resource management agencies, including US Fish and Wildlife Service and some agencies within Canada. So these tools are used to develop a desktop-based workflow that helps us make decisions supporting natural resource management. And so the applications where this has been documented to be applied is for forestry, range management, fisheries management, wildfire planning, climate change analysis, as well as watershed restoration and conservation risk analyses and research. And so on the map on the on the right-hand side, you can see the extent of the product outlined in blue. So that's just about 80,000 square kilometers that we've gotten processed through this system. This is the same slide, but what I'm showing you is the current status of where we have been doing some modeling across the area of interest in the last few years. And this is under an initiative supported by Alberta Environment and Parks and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, run through FRI Research, through the water program at FRI Research. We have been able to produce road erosion estimates for key fisheries watersheds, key priority watersheds across these slopes. So some of these watersheds are identified as priorities for watercourse crossing restoration as well. And we can use these road erosion outputs in combination with watercourse crossing information to prioritize and identify where we might both be seeing problems related to fish passage, but as well as problems related to road erosion. So this is the why. Why do we care? Why is this important? Well, kid, I won't. I'll be frank. This is quite a significant problem across most jurisdictions across the world, likely. Sediment is the largest pollutant to streams in the absence of natural disturbance, and typically linear features, unsurfaced, unpaved linear features are usually the main source. But the problem is huge. We've got roads covering every corner of the province, and it's complicated on how we understand such a large issue, as well as taking a place-based approach. Which watershed values are being impacted? Not all watersheds are the same. Not all watersheds contain similar values, which we are trying to manage for. And so understanding how sediment is impacting aquatic ecosystems or hydrological processes is important as well. But by being able to put this in perspective and look at road erosion processes at different spatial scales, it allows us to identify which roads and trails are causing the largest impacts across different spatial scales. So it gives us some ability to understand where these problems are on the landscape and what they're contributing to. And lastly, the development of these LiDAR-based products and tools is really in an effort to work with other research agencies and institutions, as well as road and watercourse crossing owners, to manage these issues at a watershed scale in a collaborative fashion. So it's truly a collaborative program and partnership between agriculture and forestry and FRI Research. Some fundamental background on the drivers of erosion and sediment delivery. I think we can all think about this at a fairly simple concept, and it makes sense. So if you have large areas of exposed mineral soils, you will have higher potential for erosion. just on the fact that there's more exposed mineral soils. Steeper slopes are influenced by gravity, and so they are inherently identified as higher risk for erosion. The way that we manage our roads, as well as the access and the traffic that's on those roads, has a huge influence on drivers of erosion, as well as the magnitude of erosion. Soil texture is a dominant driver, as well as the physical properties of the soil itself, such as infiltration. Whether water moves slowly or quickly over top of the surface, as well as how quickly it infiltrates is a fundamental factor in many soil erosion models. And so we already have the capability to risk rank roads based on some fundamental physical factors, but it's difficult to scale that up at larger landscapes and try to understand what that means in terms of sediment delivery to aquatic ecosystems. This slide is a basic conceptual explanation of how the road erosion and delivery index model works. So currently right now it is an index. I'll speak to that a little bit later. But what that means is that it doesn't have any units attached to it. So we're currently not reporting in units of tons per hectare per year or kilograms per square meters of soil loss, but we are able to run the model and rank things without units from high to low. And that certainly gets us somewhere on the landscape as well, consistently. So we have two components of this road erosion model. One is the production of sediment, and secondarily is the delivery of that sediment to streams. So on the top left-hand picture, we see, this is actually just an old seismic line, which is a truck trail, but we see the production of sediment through rainfall, causing erosion on the road surface, and then that runoff and associated sediment is leaving the road surface and causing what we see observed in the picture below, which is a sediment plume. So if we know relationships in between the contributing area of the road surface, how much it's raining, how often it rains, and then the physical characteristics of the sediment plumes, we're able to derive some physical relationships and try to predict how big of a plume you get for a given size of road with a given soil texture and infiltration rate. Now, when we don't generate a plume, obviously that sediment needs to go somewhere. And we often see the production of sediment terminating at a stream, which is what you see in the top right-hand side. And we call this delivery. So this is sediment delivery. The runoff and the associated sediment being generated from the road surface is being directly delivered into the stream. Now, for the example on the left-hand side, if the plume is long enough, it could theoretically reach a flowing water as well. And that is exemplified by the diagram that I've just brought up on the right, which is from the publication, which is cited on the bottom, which is where which is how we developed this model. So conceptually, this cartoon is telling us how the model works in terms of we put a design rainstorm on the landscape, and we're not modeling large rain events. We're modeling very small, normal 1 and 2 year, 1 and 1 year rain events, very low precipitation intensity. And what that does is it creates runoff on the road surface. And depending on the configuration of the road and how the digital elevation model parses out specific components related to where water is leaving the road, which is all part of the algorithm, it will either predict that there is a sediment plume, and it will give you a length associated with that plume and whether or not the length, the plume is long enough to reach the stream, or if it is at a watercourse crossing, the plume is predicted to, or the runoff is predicted to be delivered to the stream. So this road erosion and delivery index contains 5 primary analysis components. One is the parameterization of the road stream network. And so it breaks the road up into topographically distinct segments, each with endpoint, which is draining the runoff, which is generated on that road segment, which is the second component, which is the road runoff generation portion of the modeling, as well as the generation of road surface erosion, which is based on constants which are derived from the literature. And then what this model does is it spatially distributes these runoff hydrographs, storm runoff hydrographs, through the road networks in an attempt to connect them to streams based on topography. Another feature, which I'll talk about in a few other slides, is the ability for the model to identify where additional structures could be placed to drain water from the road surface that would reduce the hydrological connectivity of the overall road network. Okay, so it is a model. I did state that it is currently a dimensionless index, which means that we don't have any idea of how many kilograms of soil could be delivered to a stream at any given time for any given road segment. But what we have been doing, and we're still working up this data, is calibrating the model and validating the model. And so what we did to refine the ready model is we actually set up a series of experiments, both time integrated experiments as well as controlled process-based experiments such as rainfall simulation, with some graduate students to determine the base erosion rates across different types of roads with different types of management imposed on them. Seasonal reclamation, access control, fine textured soils versus coarse textured soils, et cetera, et cetera. And to validate, what we did was we ran the model and we went to the field to try to identify where the road erosion model was failing to predict sediment delivery. And a good example of where it failed to predict sediment delivery is on the image on the right-hand side. So you can see a gentleman standing there. He is between the photographer, and between the photographer is a ditch block which isn't essentially doing its job. So it's not taking water from the ditch and moving it across the road into a stable vegetated surface so it can infiltrate. The water is moving right past the ditch block into a mapped watercourse, which is a culvert. So if this would have been functional, you would have seen shorter plume lengths being generated and likely a decrease in the degree of hydrological connectivity and sediment delivery of this road. Okay. So the model is fairly simple. You really only need a shape file. It's a spatial model. You need some coefficients, which I've spoken to. We've developed through some previous field work. But you also need some spatial data. So the spatial data that you need is you need your road network. And so you import your road network, you run the model, and then it spits out, it attributes all the spatial data, and then you can build cumulative distribution functions. And so one of the outputs of the ready model, first and foremost, is a ranked index, so it's dimensionless, of sediment production, which is erosion, as well as sediment delivery, which is that soil being connected to a stream. And you get that ranked for every single segment of the road that has been parsed out topographically. So what we're seeing on the left-hand side is a cumulative distribution of only the segments of roads which have been identified to be contributing sediment to a stream. So on the left-hand side, you can see that this is only 44% of this modeling run, for example, that has been identified to be predicting sediment to streams. So 66% of the road is not hydrologically connected. We're only looking at the portion that's hydrologically connected. But the point that I'm trying to make here, and this is overwhelmingly the case with every watershed that we're modeling, that a very small portion of the overall road network contributes the majority of the sediment to streams. We see this through predictive modeling. We also see this through field validation of mapping roads across entire watersheds. So for this model run, only 3% of contributing roads produce half of the sediment. And when we're talking about large watershed scales, such as the Pembina or the Burland or the Wild Hay, with thousands and thousands of kilometers of roads, it's still a big number, but it allows us to really refine where the risk is being identified. So the second output, which I spoke to before, which I'll talk to right now, is what we do after. So how do we manage that 3%, or how do we manage that 15% of the road segments which are producing the majority of the sediment to streams? You can run an optimization algorithm in the ready model, which incrementally adds additional drainage points to the roads in order to minimize the plume length, the sediment plume length, which of course decreases the probability of it being connected to a flowing watercourse. So this is actually quite neat because the model can not only show us where risk is identified, where risk is present on the landscape or likely to be present on the landscape, but if we go and validate those data, we can go back and then we can further use some tools to understand where we might be achieving the greatest amount of sediment reduction by installing some strategically placed culverts or other types of runoff management that would be directing that runoff into stable locations. So graphical output of what I just showed you, or a similar output to what I showed you before. What we're looking at on the left-hand side is the road erosion model, so the ready model outputs related to the production of sediment. And so on the left-hand side, you can see that all roads, which are the lines, as well as the stream crossings, which are the dots, or the drains. They don't always have to be stream crossings. They can be topographically controlled drains as well, or they could be engineered drains, such as a cross drain or a culvert. But what we see here is all roads produce erosion, of course, because they're unsurfaced roads. This is a temporary forestry road network. But we can also identify areas that are likely to be have higher rates of road erosion comparatively than others, which are denoted by the red lines, those red road segments. These road segments are likely located on steeper hills, steeper slopes with longer lengths, individual road segments of longer length. On the right-hand side, the model also, and this is really what we're interested in, the model is also attempting to predict the magnitude of sediment delivery of road-associated runoff to individual streams associated with these road segments. So the majority of the road network, as I showed before, is not connecting to streams and contributing or predicted to be contributing sediment to streams. But there are a few portions of the overall road network, which is about 50 kilometers worth of road, that are overwhelmingly identified as higher risk and likely contributing sediment to streams. So with this, the outputs of this model, the ready model predicted that about 38% of the total road network was delivering sediment to streams. So that's about 17.5 kilometers of the overall model run. But the roads that are highlighted in red on the right-hand side only compose about 6% of the total road network. And interestingly enough, they're predicted to account for over 25% of the sediment delivery. So by managing these 5 locations, for example, we're going and looking to see if there's risk in reality. We're likely in a better spot already. Okay, so the figure on the left is the same as the previous slide. So what it's doing is it's showing the 5 segments which were identified to have the highest rates of sediment delivery to these streams. But the figure on the right is taken from an article, but it's showing how the drain optimization exercise works. So once we have an output of the road erosion model and the delivery, we can run this drain optimization algorithm, which attempts to minimize that plume length and disconnect the road network from the stream. So in the scenario A, what it's showing is a pretty classic scenario. It's showing a road that parallels a stream in close proximity. And the green dots were identified to be contributing sediment to the stream simply because of the proximity of the road to the stream. The plume lengths were longer than the distance between the road and the stream. So what the model is, optimized model is suggesting that with a few strategically located cross drains, you can reduce the generation of runoff and sediment-laden water and minimize those plume lengths so that they're further disconnected from the stream. And so all of these scenarios are easily envisioned in in a field setting. The scenario from B looks like it's a little bit of a steeper slope, and it's optimizing some some drainage locations in close proximity to the stream. And scenario C is likely a very common scenario that we can all envision in our minds. We have a stream crossing and likely negative approaches of the road into the stream crossing. And so by managing that road associated runoff in close proximity to the stream and moving it off the road into the riparian area or into a vegetated area, you will minimize the contribution of road associated runoff into the watercourse. So what does it look like in the field? So here's a real life example. We ran this model. We went to the field. We looked to see how the model performed. And what we did was we ran the model and identified those 5 high-risk segments. And overall, about 40% of the road was predicted to be connected to the stream. This is one of those examples. And so behind the photograph is about 500 meters of road surface, which is not drained by a cross drain or anything until you get up to the near stream area. And that's why it was identified as high risk. And so when we look at the figure on the right, what the model did is it identified that at the point of that red star is likely where you will get the largest single-handed reduction in sediment delivery out of that entire 40 or 50 kilometers of road. Putting another cross drain closer to the stream will result in a marginal improvement. But if you only put your cross drain at the blue star, you would still be draining this entire 500 meters of road, and your plume length would exceed the distance between the road and the stream. So you get your biggest bang for your buck by controlling your runoff further away from the road, and then site-specific BMPs when you're within the riparian area need to be applied to address that small segment which is still connected. But after full optimization of this model, we were able to reduce the connectivity by quite a bit, and so almost 95% of the road was not connected. So only 5% of the road was predicted to be connected through some portion of the road network. So from the optimization perspective, what we can do is we can run the model and run the optimization model to identify where additional drainage locations would result in the largest proportional decrease in sediment delivery. So by fully optimizing the model, which is adding about 160 cross drains, you could achieve almost entirely disconnect the road from the stream network. We know that everybody knows that that's not likely a realistic number. We're not going to go back after this road's built and put in 160 cross drains. But we can also rank those optimized drains and focus on the ones which are achieving the largest effect. So by focusing only on installing four strategically located cross drains or other types of runoff management structures, we could reduce the overall connectivity by 70%, leaving only about 10% of the road network connected to streams. So that's fantastic, right? And that shows that this field work, this trial showed that the model was effective at identifying where risk was, as well as identifying where risk could be most effectively and economically managed. Okay, I guess I'm wrapping up now. So just to conclude, I hope I've made a few take-home messages. One is really all roads do matter, and all roads do have erosion on them. But it's important to understand that only a few of them are causing the majority of the impact. And if we can identify and rank these roads across watershed scales, which is how we're managing aquatic resources and fish populations, we can effectively identify how to reduce those non-point source issues. And furthermore, we can prioritize the efficient use of resources in terms of both data collection and validation, but also restoration and mitigative actions. So what we're doing currently within forestry and FRI research is we're promoting this as an interactive decision support tool to help inform management decisions at most levels of the planning and operation cycle. So this could be applied at a planning stage when roads are being designed in an office-based environment, or it could also be applied at an operational stage to try to identify where we can mitigate or address identified risks. And this also helps to address some of the higher order mandates, which we're all interested and obligated to make decisions under, such as the Alberta Land Stewardship Act, species at risk legislation, as well as cumulative effects management frameworks. Yeah, and so this is likely one of the exciting successes that we've had to be able to capitalize on technology and innovation to facilitate sustainable land management, land and water resource management planning across Alberta. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I believe I have one last slide acknowledging a large number of individuals and organizations which have either provided resources or hard labor or volunteer hours in making this initiative a success. So with that, I'd like to thank the funding agencies, which is DFO and the Forest Resource Improvement Association of Alberta, as well as the partnering institution of FRI Research, which has been instrumental in this program. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I just want to take a second to remind our attendees today that you can ask questions by using the GoToWebinar toolbar located on the right side of your screen, and you just type in your question. With that being said, it looks like we have several questions here, so I'll start with the first one. All right, so question one, can your modeling predict sediment transport distance downstream once the sediment reaches the stream?
Yeah, good question. So there are some tools which within that NetMap ArcGIS Esri-based add-in, which allow you to identify not the propagation of the sediment wave within the stream, but what it does allow you to do is it allows you to flip those outputs kind of upside down and identify which stream reaches are receiving the highest amounts of sediment. So instead of saying which roads are producing the highest and delivering the highest amounts of sediment, we can flip that and we can say which stream reaches are receiving the most predicted sediment, and how is that accumulating to further downstream reaches based on information that we don't have locally calibrated for Alberta. But if you had those values, you could infer or possibly explore how that downstream propagation would look. But we haven't really looked into that tool yet.
Perfect. Our next question is related to the NetMap tool. How accessible is the NetMap tool? Does it require a high degree of GIS skill to use?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. So the NetMap tool it's fairly easy. It's a graphic user interface, similar to what you would see in other graphic user interfaces, I guess. So there's buttons that prompt you to import a roads layer, and you click on a button, and then it shows you a progress bar and it walks you through the next step. The challenge of the entire NetMap platform, there are several challenges. One is currently right now, being able to run the model is only available to the forest industry due to proprietary issues regarding LiDAR, which is a little bit beyond my scope of understanding. However, the outputs are not. So the outputs of the road erosion and delivery index model, which both myself as well as FRI Research have been running and submitting under native trout recovery initiatives to Alberta Environment Parks, are available. But there are some restrictions around the physical use of the model by individuals and the distribution of that data. The second challenge is the size of the data sets. So even if, for example, when I'm running the model, the data sets, because they're grounded in LiDAR, are actually being run through the digital elevation model. So the 2-meter LiDAR-based digital elevation model. And so what that does is it necessitates you having a good computer and big hard drives. But it's not impossible. But it is certainly a challenge in kind of making the model a little bit more portable. So those outputs that have been produced, I don't believe there's any easy way for the general public to access them, but my contact information is identified in the top right-hand corner of the last slide. And if people or organizations are interested in some of those outputs, we can work together to realize that.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is the model only effective for existing roadways? Could you use it in planning of building new roadways so you know where to put sediment control structures?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So from my experience, I think it could be used in both situations. So it could be used before a road actually gets constructed. So from a conceptual stage, we have perhaps done some road layout, we've tied ribbon, and we're interested to understand where additional management needs to be taken, or additional care and attention needs to be taken in terms of installing additional erosion control structures or engineered structures to manage water and associated road runoff. That can be done at a planning level, and then it can be refined at an operational level. So I believe that it can be applied in both situations. There are some minor nuances with how the road gets built and whether the model will be representative, because if you are modeling a road that hasn't been built, it simply gets draped over the digital elevation model, if you know what I mean. So there's no capability of the model to impose like a cut and fill type of process, which rearranges the topography and the natural topography of the digital elevation model. So when you build your road, if you reverse the topography, which is a really effective way to manage road runoff, you put in a few broad dips, or you reverse the grade strategically as you follow the contour. That's been shown to be a cheap and effective way to manage runoff. But those locations would likely not jive with the model outputs that were done at a planning level. So those would have to be adjusted through including those features in the secondary model run after the road got built, to be able to further refine the identification of risk. Yeah, I hope that made sense.
Perfect. Our next question, one of the greatest challenges of restoration or reclamation is soil compaction, especially roads. Is rough and loose our only useful technique to combat this? Is it at all a useful technique to hydraulically disconnect abandoned roads?
That's a great question too. That's kind of more of a philosophical question, right? And it ties into some of the requirements that maybe that road was approved under, or the requirements that road is to be reclaimed under. So currently right now, when we talk about infiltration, the model assumes that the road surface, it's just a model, right? So it's as smart as you make it, but the model assumes that there's no infiltration on the road surface. So that's a little bit problematic. The way that the numbers work out when we look at the blood and guts of the model is we're over predicting runoff. We know that we're over predicting runoff currently, and we're working on correcting that, but it's simply because we don't have good site specific information on road infiltration rates or ditch infiltration rates or infiltration rates of different types of forest floors. So we are a little bit data poor in that respect. But I think at the current level that this model is being applied as an index, it gets us in the ballpark, and it's proven to be fairly successful at identifying those areas where you can see the risk, or you can at least see why the model thought that there was risk there. Yeah, and I believe I answered most of that question. I think I forgot one part of it, but.
The last part of that was, is it a useful technique to hydraulically disconnect abandoned roads?
Right, so like, do we hydrologically disconnect roads, or do we fully reclaim them through rough and loose? We know that there's different economic impacts of that, and we know that there's likely different rule sets. So there's likely a reason why we have to reclaim temporary forestry roads, because there's a rule, right? They can only be on the landscape for 3 years. So Seasonally deactivating a road or partially deactivating a road, whatever terminology you want to use, putting the road to bed. So you'd be removing the high risk crossings. You would be disconnecting, trying to remove or trying to reduce the amount of connectivity in between the road surface and the stream. So there's documented techniques that are successful. You could seed your road. That'll take 80% off your base erosion estimate right off the rip, right? As soon as you put an umbrella over top of the soil, you've reduced the forces associated with raindrop splash erosion, right? So it's likely a choice which is dictated by rules, which are outside of the conversation that we're having today, but rough and loose restores, like that's full on decompaction. That would be likely increasing the rate of infiltration over and above of what it was before, at least for a short period of time. Hydrologically disconnecting the road likely addresses many of those items as well. It would be a management decision whether or not that road should be left in place, but yet stabilized over the short term. So I think both would be effective. I think it's certainly good. It's certainly a good discussion topic, though.
Thank you. The next question, can the results of this model be restated as recommended road drainage best management practices?
They could be, but they would likely be viewed as site-specific and likely a little bit prescriptive. So I would simply use this model to identify where I might be able to optimize my drainage if I had a road currently, which may or may not be identified as a problem. I might not choose to install all those drains based on my financial limitations or based on my professional expertise in terms of what I think is the best place, where I think the best place for the drainage across the drainage location to be. The decision of where to install those will be limited by site-specific constraints. Like if the model is telling you to put a cross drain in through the middle of a through cut, something's wrong, right? Because that's not gonna be an easy job to do. So you're gonna have to make a decision as the field person whether or not that's the best place for that drain to go. So it could be used as a tool to inform the application of road design and drainage. It could also be used as a tool to inform or attempt to quantify the change as a result of installing additional things that might be considered as best management practices to reduce road associated runoff, right? So you could say, well, and I think that's the best answer I could give.
Perfect, thank you. Our next question is, once you identify an area of high risk, what are the next steps? Do you approach the owner of the road and work with them to repair/fix the issue?
Yeah, so that's also a really good question. So currently right now, this isn't being applied in like a regulatory manner. Okay, so the work that I'm doing internally with members of forest tenure holders who are interested in seeing the utility of this product is basically in the validation component. So yes, the model told us that there's likely a problem here. We can understand why the model is identifying that risk, or in a conceptual and planning phase. So we might run the road erosion model with a forestry company, with a forest company, to help them identify, based on their road layout, like this is where some of the risk is. And it's interesting because in that context, often the planning forester or the person who's doing the layout in the field would say, yeah, I thought that section of road, would likely cause us to raise our eyebrows a little bit and pay a little closer attention. So in that terms, that's in that sense, that's how that's being applied. So it's outside of completely outside of a regulatory framework, more of a best management practice, if it's available and if people are willing to work on generating these outputs. On the other hand, how this product is being used is to identify problems. So the work that FRI Research has been doing with the Native Trout Recovery Program under Alberta Environment and Parks has been to run this for road networks at priority fisheries watershed scale, and then identify the top percentile. So let's say like the 90th percentile, which is the top 10% of all those locations which we see on these photos, these puddles, these drains, these stream crossings, the top 10% where sediment delivery is likely to be the highest. And then through working with non-governmental organizations and stewardship groups, those sites are visited. There's some data that's collected at those sites as to the size of the road, the contributing area, if it's vegetated or not. And then those are brought back to us to help refine the model, but they're also put into a database and a framework for restoration and remediation. And because we've run the model, we have fairly good confidence that if that site's been identified as the top 10, one of the top 10 offenders, for lack of better words, and it's visited and it's confirmed that it is contributing sediment to streams, it's likely a high priority for restoration under those nature legacy funds and those native trout recovery initiatives. So currently I'm seeing a lot more uptake and success in working collaboratively across stewardship groups to help them identify where they can make the biggest difference in their local watersheds in sediment abatement.
Perfect. We have time for a few more questions here. Have some of the road segments that have been modeled for drain optimization had drain management structures installed? Have they then been monitored to understand whether or not the model results were as effective as predicted?
That would be my dream. So the answer is no. But what would really be perfect would be able to would be the opportunity to do a controlled experiment. So we would model a planned road network. That road network would get developed. We would measure those sediment plumes and calibrate our model to that specific area, and then we would implement those additional drains and see if we decreased those mapped plume lengths from year 1 to year 4 through time. Right, that would be the cat's pajamas. I would love to do that, but currently, right now, that's just not within scope. That's a big program. Don't have a lot of resources for that, but it's a great idea.
Perfect. Our next question is, can we have access to terrain works, and may we have copies of the slides, the presentation slides?
So if you contact me, I would be more than happy to provide those contacts as well as a copy of my slides. I believe this presentation will be recorded and posted on the AWC3 website. In terms of access to the model, I did address that in an earlier question. So currently right now, button pushing capability, the physical possession of the model, to my understanding, is only available to forest tenure holders. So I'm sorry, oil and gas and petrochemical sector. However, I did also specify that the outputs of the model are, of course, available, depending on whether or not your road is located within one of the areas that we've already modeled. If you have a permanent road, a DLO or an LOC, in that area, chances are we've actually modeled it already. So all you have to do is get in touch with us, and I can put you in touch with the native trout recovery program folks who have the outputs. But I don't know who's asking that question, so you just have to contact me offline, and I'd be happy to talk about this further.
Okay, and we're nearing 1 o'clock, so we have time for one more question. Is there an optimal LiDAR cell size that is required to get realistic model outputs? For example, 1 meter LiDAR or 10 meter LiDAR?
Yeah, what a great question. You know, I might talk a lot about remote sensing, but I don't really know a lot about remote sensing, honestly. So I'm a user of the products and the data. From my experience as a hydrologist in Alberta, really fine digital elevation data sets are very powerful, but you do have to be aware of kind of that signal to noise ratio. So for example, if we used a very high resolution digital elevation model to calculate certain metrics related to the curvature of a stream, you would get very, very different results because at a 1 meter resolution, your stream's bouncing across from bank to bank, right? And so you're overestimating a lot of your sinuosity measurements, for example. So optimally, I can't really answer that. I like 5 meter DEMs. I find them pretty representative when I'm working in steeper areas with lots of very, very small streams. I might be more inclined to use a smaller resolution, such as what was built under the wet areas mapping synthetic stream layer, which I think is a 2 meter DM with a 4 hectare flow initiation threshold. Yeah, so it's all about the question and the scale.
All right, it looks like we've run out of time here. We do have some questions remaining, but unfortunately we will not be able to get to them. My apologies for that. But a reminder, this presentation and the questions will be posted to AWC3's website. So I just want to thank Michael Wagner here for today's presentation, and to all those who have joined. With continued education and information sharing, we believe we can fix this provincially significant issue. Please join us again Tuesday, November 2nd for our next webinar on compliance and enforcement presented by the AER. Michael, did you have any final words today?
No, if anybody had any unanswered questions or would like to get a hold of me, please feel free to reach out. I have my contact email provided, and you can also look me up on the government directory.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for today's presentation, and to all those who have joined, thanks to ACA for sponsoring this event. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.
Thank you.